The minorities and dissidents endured hell during the reign of terror of Nazism in 20th century Germany. Lesbians were no exception to the rule, but their treatment was different because the Nazis considered women to be appendages of men's existence. In today's video, we will recount the experience of homosexual women throughout the Third Reich and the tragedies they had to endure. Welcome to a new installment of military history. Let's begin. During the Weimar Republic, German society underwent complex social, political, and cultural transformations. On one hand, the country was marked by political turmoil and violence, along with economic difficulties. On the other hand, Germans enjoyed greater political and social freedoms, leading to visible artistic movements, expanded press, and increasingly noticeable alternative cultures, especially in major cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Frankfurt. During that time, different lesbian communities emerged, forming clubs and social associations to foster networks and connections to protect themselves from conservative scrutiny. The most famous lesbian associations were the Violetta and Monbijou women's clubs in Berlin, which held informal meetings in bars and clubs, such as Monakel DL, and the most famous and crowded of all, El Dorado. Legislative changes and the relaxation of sexual morals after World War I allowed lesbianism to find an outlet in some cabarets in major cities, turning Berlin into a kind of global capital of the LGBT movement, especially during the early years of the Weimar Republic. A significant number of Germans opposed public debates on sex and sexuality, considering them decadent, overly permissive, and immoral. Many citizens were disturbed by the increasing visibility of sex in advertising, cinema, and other aspects of daily life. For these Germans, gay and lesbian communities symbolized what they saw as the degeneration of German society. Various right-wing political groups and dominant religious organizations sought to counteract this aspect of Weimar culture by promoting their version of German culture rooted in classical music and literature, religion, and family. In some cases, these groups blamed sexual deviants, such as lesbians, for corrupting German culture. The emerging Nazi ideology also blamed other minorities, such as Jews, communists, and Roma. Even before coming to power, many Nazis were bothered by the visibility of gay and lesbian communities. They condemned homosexuality, seeing it as a threat to the German people. The Nazi Party officially opposed any attempts to decriminalize male same-sex relationships, arguing that homosexuality was a destructive vice. Hitler's supporters believed that men engaging in unnatural lust among themselves should be pursued with the utmost severity, as such vices would lead to the disintegration of the German people. The progressive rise of conservatism and the eventual ascent of Nazism to power led to the forced closure of these venues, as well as the prohibition of lesbian literature and the weekly magazine for ideal friendship between women called Die Freundin, in order to protect youth from texts deemed obscene and of low quality. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. Shortly after, the gay and lesbian communities in Germany came under pressure and scrutiny from the new totalitarian regime. For men accused of homosexuality, the situation worsened throughout the 1930s. leading to brutal and ruthless persecution. At one point, male homosexuality became a criminal offense, or even worse, as the following testimony recounts.
They called me pedal. Pedal, it means, like in German, schwul, in bad way. Yeah. And therefore I was treated bad. If I were thief, if I were murder, they could accept me, but not this.
By eliminating meeting places and printing presses for gays and lesbians, the regime effectively dissolved the homosexual communities that had developed during the Weimar Republic. Nazism never criminalized sexual relationships between women because they viewed lesbians differently than gay men. This was mainly because lesbians, first and foremost, were women. The Nazis believed that German women had a special and unique role to play: motherhood. According to the party's logic, lesbians were women, and therefore should be mothers. They had the responsibility to give birth to racially pure Germans and thus perpetuate the Aryan race. Female homosexuality was considered a temporary and curable disorder, so they could continue to bear Aryan children. The Nazis concluded that it was easier to directly force Aryan lesbians to have children, which could be considered a violation of these citizens by the state. To encourage the procreation of Aryan children, the Nazis adopted various programs and laws, such as the Lebensborn program, which encouraged Aryan women to have many children, even outside of marriage. At the same time, the Nazi regime tried to prohibit or limit the reproduction of other ethnic groups such as Jews and Roma, while also sterilizing people deemed racially inferior. Other laws, like the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, defined who could have sexual relations with whom, so that respectable Germans would not associate with the riffraff of Europe. Much of German society viewed lesbians as outsiders, people who did not fit into the commonality of the people. Therefore, they were at a higher risk of being reported and then attacked by the Nazi regime. Not all lesbians had the same options. For example, Aryan lesbians had a much better chance of being saved or forgiven for their sexual orientation than Jewish or Romani lesbians, who faced persecution strictly for racial reasons. Aryan lesbians, especially those with more economic resources, tried to hide their sexuality and entered into marriages of convenience, leading secret sexual lives, usually with close friends or domestic employees. Some broke contact with their previous circles of friends, or withdrew from public life to start anew. Others even moved to new cities or the countryside. On the other hand, there were German lesbians who dared to defy the Nazi state for political reasons, seeking underground meeting places where clandestine anti-Nazi resistance centers developed, among other things, helping to hide persecuted Jews, homosexuals, blacks, and Roma. Same-sex relationships were taboo for much of German society. It was common for neighbors, family members, and even friends to disapprove of the involved women and report them to the police. While lesbian relationships were not illegal and did not carry any penalties, the more conservative officers of the Nazi police forces could use background checks as an excuse to intimidate these women. In some cases, the most brutal officers even beat or physically abused women for their sexual choice. The following testimony reveals the anguish of lesbians during that time.
And I was also struggling with my identity as a gay person in a world where we didn't have the kind of support that there is today. And thank God, I am so happy for young people today who are gay, who don't have to go through what I had to, you know.
It is true that there were no legal consequences for lesbians based on denunciations, but they frequently affected women considered socially marginalized. Denunciations could lead to unwanted scrutiny, causing the police to discover or invent criminal offenses. For example, it could reveal connections with a resistance organization, friendship with Jews, or subversive political behavior. In those cases, women were indeed arrested and sent to concentration camps. The example of Elise Müller and Margaret Rosenberg illustrates how the Nazi regime arrested women accused of same-sex relationships on other charges. In 1940, the Gestapo detained and interrogated Müller and Rosenberg based on reports from the women's co-workers. They claimed that the two women had engaged in sexual relationships with other women. The Gestapo asserted that these sexual relationships had interfered with the women's work duties at a Berlin tram station, so they were charged with subversion. Eventually, the two women were deported to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where they were registered as political prisoners with the annotation lesbian written in large red letters next to their surnames. First-hand testimonials, memoirs, and diaries of former female prisoners reveal that they had sexual encounters with each other in concentration camps. According to these sources, the relationships ranged from consensual intimacies to prostitution and brutal sexual assaults. Both heterosexual and homosexual relationships existed in the camps. Some women engaged in sexual relationships with their fellow prisoners. While they were not originally lesbians, certain women developed relationships with individuals of the same sex, describing them as a source of comfort in the camps and necessary for survival.
Te sacaban de la cama a las 7 por la mañana. Esto era la muerte, porque cuando hay menos 12, menos 13, y no puedes más soportar porque no tienes nada, tienes este traje y el número aquí, y solo con esto teníamos que ir a trabajar.
Due to the unbearable living conditions and tasks, as narrated in the following testimony, the emotional and physical relationships between individuals of the same sex in the camps could be shocking to other prisoners who came from diverse, generally more conservative cultures and backgrounds. In post-war memoirs and testimonials, some survivors described lesbians in the camps as a threat to the safety and well-being of other prisoners. Others viewed same-sex relationships as an example of degradation caused by the camp experience. These descriptions reflect the extent to which lesbians were often treated as monsters, even by their fellow inmates in concentration camps. However, there are stories that have left a mark on history and have become a banner for LGBTQ+ movements fighting for recognition of their victims during the Holocaust. One such story is the relationship between the Jewish Felice Schragenheim and Lily Elisabeth Wust. Lily, trapped in an unhappy marriage and belonging to the Nazi Party, initially did not know that her beloved was Jewish. When Felice confessed her Hebrew origin, their union was on the verge of breaking, but love prevailed. Not even the repugnant ideology of Nazism could overcome the affection these two women had for each other. This love story inspired a poignant film called Aimé and Jaguar, portraying the tragedy of the two women. Below, we can see a scene from the movie.
Ich bin Jüdin, Lilly. Ich liebe dich.
Before Felice was arrested by the Gestapo in 1944, the two women signed a symbolic marriage contract drafted by themselves in which they pledged eternal love. Obviously, the document had no legal value, but it carried a spectacular poetic weight. Felice did not survive the Theresienstadt concentration camp, but Elizabeth did manage to survive the Holocaust. Historian Monica Alvarez tells us how the story of these women was immortalized in a museum.
Y ahí en ese momento es cuando Lily empieza la lucha incansable por recuperar a su amada. Quiere sacarla de los campos de concentración, quiere recuperarla, quiere que viva. El problema es que al final los nazis acabaron con la vida de Felice, no pudo salvarla, pero hizo algo muy bonito Lily. Hizo un legado a modo de fotografías, de postales, de incluso un diario donde apuntaba todo lo que se habían enviado por correspondencia, ese famoso manual de lágrimas, y todo eso lo llevó al Museo Judío de Berlín y todos podemos disfrutar de ello.
The difference in treatment towards gays and lesbians is based on the distinct consideration of men and women in Nazi society. Due to the misogyny of Nazi ideology, women practically had restricted access to politics and power, so the regime did not consider them a threat to its stability. On the other hand, in the pursuit of increasing the birth rate of the master race, gays were seen as an impediment, while every woman was capable of bearing an Aryan baby, including lesbians who, if necessary, were violated to conceive a little Nazi baby. It would be a mistake to think that women, including lesbians, were more fortunate during those dark years. In essence, the apparent tolerance was another manifestation of female marginalization in Nazi society. Totalitarian regimes often amplify repression by exercising limited tolerance towards certain disapproved groups that are not deemed politically dangerous, allowing these groups to attack the truly marginalized minorities. The classic and sinister strategy of divide and conquer. In this reflective manner, we are reaching the end of today's video. We thank you for watching until the end and look forward to welcoming you in the upcoming installments of Military History.